This video addresses the type of language that we use when making observational-based assessments. We're going to take a look at subjective versus objective language. So subjective and objective language are sort of polar opposites, and the type of language that we are looking for when we are making and recording any kind of observational assessment. Be that an observational assessment that is a standalone, like an anecdotal note or a running record, or an observation that's part of a larger assessment strategy. Either way, we are looking for objective language. So the difference between objective and subjective language. Subjective language includes feelings, assumptions. It's generally not measurable. In subjective language, when observations are written in subjective language, we can very clearly see the observer's perspective on what has occurred. It often includes bias, sometimes implicit or explicit bias of the observer, and there's a lack of inter-rater reliability. I know it seems weird to talk about reliability with something like observation, but there is indeed a reliability aspect of any assessment strategy. So obviously that subjective language is what we're not looking for when we're recording observations. The objective language is what we are looking for. And objective language is made up of observable fact, as close as we can get to fact. It's measurable, meaning there's a clearly defined observation in which someone could measure over time. Objective language can be and is agreed upon by multiple observers. And when observations are recorded using objective language, we achieve reliability. In this case, we're talking about inter-rater reliability, meaning that it can be agreed upon or would be written very similarly by multiple observers. So we're going to do a little exercise in which we rewrite an anecdotal note. And this is an actual anecdotal note taken from a preschool classroom. This is an example of an anecdotal note that was taken for the purpose of documenting challenging behavior. And this is, as I said, a preschool classroom. And the note as written is incredibly subjective. Juan and Billy are fighting at the water table as usual. Billy is pouring water carelessly through a funnel into a cup. Juan snatches the cup. Billy screams and kicks Juan, trying to hurt him. Juan smacks Billy and runs to Mrs. Johnson, screaming, "Billy kicked me." Mrs. Johnson comforts Juan and sends Billy to the calm down center. Juan returns to the water table smiling maliciously since he got Billy in trouble. So back to looking at subjective language, it's very clear this anecdote is full of emotions that we can't possibly know if the children are feeling or not. It is definitely slanted in a particular direction. It is very clear that whomever the observer is has a very particular feeling about Juan and Billy and a very particular assumption about what did and did not happen at the water table. Now let's tackle the task of rewriting this particular anecdotal note into one that uses much more objective language. Take a look at the first section. Juan and Billy are fighting at the water table as usual. So the first bit of language for me that comes up as subjective is the word fighting. What is fighting? Is it measurable? Like would I describe fighting as the same as you're fighting? And in this case, what calls into question for me is this even necessary? As you can see from having looked at the whole anecdote, you can see that we're going to go on to describe exactly what is happening at the water table. So for me, the fighting is absolutely unnecessary in this initial sentence. It's giving the observer's perspective that this is a fight between the two boys. So first things first, fighting can just go away. The other thing that can go away in this first sentence is as usual. It's also absolutely unnecessary, and it sends a very clear message that the teacher is frustrated with this, that this is a constant interaction. And because we are not looking at a pattern of interactions here, as usual, sways the reader. into thinking that every time in there at the water table or every time Juan and Billy are together, there's fighting, which may or may not be true when looking at a broader pattern of what's going on. So we can get rid of as usual. Billy is pouring water carelessly through a funnel into a cup. So carelessly is clearly an emotion-based and a judgment-based word, and is unnecessary here. Sometimes students ask me, is through a funnel into a cup important? And the answer to that is maybe. We don't really know exactly what is going on in this situation, and uh, it is plausible that that is important information. For whatever reason, the observer thought to write it down. Um, if we were using this anecdote as part of a broader pattern of observations, it's possible that the funnel or the cup are a triggering incident. It's possible that uh, the water splashed Juan, which started this situation to occur. The long and short of it is that it is possible that that's important information. It's completely objective. There's no reason not to leave it in the anecdotal note. And the last part of this section, Juan snatches the cup. I don't think snatches is the most objective term for it. I think we should probably get rid of snatches and change it to something like takes. Juan takes the cup. As you could probably tell from the initial subjective writing of this anecdotal note, there's a very clear bias against Juan in this particular anecdote. Billy screams and kicks Juan, trying to hurt him. Sometimes students ask me about the term screams. Screams is absolutely measurable. We can, as teachers, as observers, as educators, the difference between talking and screaming is very observable. And there is not a lot of detail here about what kind of scream. It's hard to have a lot of detail about what kind of scream because any kind of detail like screams angrily would introduce even more ambiguity and more subjectivity to what we're saying. Screams is a measurable term and can absolutely stay. I worked with someone who was sort of like a real objective language purist in her taking of anecdotal notes. She would write things like, Billy says at an elevated decibel. Um, I don't think that's necessary. Let's make anecdotes approachable for everyone involved. So we can keep screams. We can also keep kicks. Once again, that's very observable. Foot of one child impacts foot of another child. Kicks is an okay term to use. And obviously, trying to hurt him needs to go away. Juan smacks Billy and runs to Mrs. Johnson, screaming, Billy kicked me. Again, we've got the same issue with smacks that we had with snatches. It's not the most objective term. We can take it away and use something like hits, both of them are very measurable. We know the difference between a hit and a touch, but in this case, hits is a more objective word. And runs to Mrs. Johnson, screaming, Billy kicked me. So this next modification is not necessarily required. It is objective as it is written. However, I prefer to not use a lot of clauses when I take anecdotal notes because clauses have an underlying assumption of cause and effect and connection between the ideas. So I would change this to Juan hits Billy and runs to Mrs. Johnson. Juan screams, Billy kicked me. The last section, Mrs. Johnson comforts Juan and sends Billy to the Calm Down Center. What is comfort? What does that look like? If she hugs him, we should write hugs. For the sake of this being taken out of context, I'm going to change comforts to talks to Juan. And then I also don't like and sends Billy to the Calm Down Center. Once again, it seems like those two things are related, and I would prefer to keep it a little bit more objective. So I'm going to change it to and tells Billy to go to the Calm Down Center. Juan returns to the water table smiling maliciously since he got Billy in trouble. I hope it's very clear at this point that maliciously needs to go, and since he got Billy in trouble, also needs to go. We cannot know what Juan is feeling. We cannot know what Juan is thinking unless he says so, and if he says so, then it should be written as Juan says. Sometimes when I work with students on this example, they want to take smiling out. And for me, I actually think smiling is very key. We don't know why the smile happens, but the smile itself is observable. It could be easily agreed on upon by multiple observers. And it very well may have significance in what is actually happening in this anecdotal observation. So I'm going to get rid of maliciously since he got Billy in trouble and just turn that last sentence into Juan returns to the water table smiling. Here's the anecdote as rewritten. Juan and Billy are at the water table. Billy is pouring water through a funnel into a cup. Juan takes the cup. Billy screams and kicks Juan. Juan hits Billy and runs to Mrs. Johnson. Juan screams, "Billy kicked me." Mrs. Johnson talks to Juan and tells Billy to go to the Calm Down Center. Juan returns to the water table, smiling. I'm sorry, I realized there's a typo in that last sentence. It should just say, and tells Billy to go to the Calm